This is Julie Pearson, Little Thunder. Today is Friday, September 14th, and I'm interviewing Tony Tiger as part of the Oklahoma Native Artist Project, sponsored by the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at Oklahoma State University. We're at Tony's home in Tahlequah. Tony, you've always had a distinct painting style, and over the last couple of years you've been experimenting with not just mixed media, but canvases that are more three than two-dimensional. You've also been busy reviving the Big Cone Art Program. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
Oh, my pleasure.
Where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in LA in 1964. My parents lived out there and, during the relocation period, and so I was the first child born in LA. And I grew up, so after LA we moved back to Oklahoma in 1970, around that time, and moved to Shawnee, Oklahoma, where my grandmother, who was Sac and Fox, lived. And we were introduced to our entire family, and didn't have an idea that our family was that big. And so met all the extended relatives and huge family.
What did your mom and dad do for a living?
My dad was a Baptist minister, and my mother was more of a homemaker, but she worked on occasion as well, doing different things, but primarily a homemaker.
What about, you mentioned your grandparents.
Yeah, my grandparents. My grandmother was Sac and Fox, and she was full blood, and so she probably was born right after statehood, and my grandfather was born right before statehood. My grandfather and my grandmother, I'm talking about my mother's mother, and then my father's father, and those are the grandparents that I really kind of grew up knowing. And so my grandfather was Muskogee Creek and Seminole, and he was kind of elusive as a child, and I met him probably later on in the mid-70s, and so it was kind of interesting to meet him for the first time. But yeah.
Were there any other members of your family involved in the arts or extended family?
I did. I had an older brother who was an artist, and probably natural artist, and he could draw and paint. But he never really did anything with his work. He did do some work, for the tribal newspaper and for the Sac and Fox newspaper. But he never took it beyond that, and I wish he would have, because he was a gifted artist, and he was really the early inspiration for me in wanting to become an artist, because I thought it would just be an interesting way to make a living. You wouldn't have to, punch clocks and time cards and all that good stuff. But he was probably the first inspiration in becoming an artist.
So when did you see your first piece of native art?
My first piece of native art was probably while we were living on the Standing Rock Reservation in the Dakotas, North Dakota, primarily at a small town called Fort Yates. My father took a pastorate there in the mid-1970s, and I was probably about 10 years old, and looking. It really was probably more historic things, photographs, probably some of the photographs of some of the early photographers of native art, native people, really. And then later on, seeing some more traditional work by some of the Lakota artists. Probably Oscar Howe, probably saw one of his pieces early on, and then later on seeing Alan Hauser's work, and then Richard West, and then a few other artists. But those were primarily the guys who I saw first.
Back here in Oklahoma.
Back in Oklahoma, yeah, because we'd go back and forth, and we had an opportunity to go to some museums. The Sac and Fox tribe would take their tribal members to museums sometimes, and I think we went to the Bartlesville Museum up there. What's that called? There's a museum up there, and I think the Phillips 66 company. I can't remember the name of the museum, but I remember going up there. I remember seeing a lot of the artwork. Saw some Woody Crumbo prints and A.C. Blue Eagle work, and some of the early artists. But
were you with the rest of your family? Or?
I was with the rest of my family, and it was probably pretty early on too, in like mid-70s, and so my brother was there too, and we probably looked at a few things, and just, but it was pretty fascinating because at that time, growing up in LA and then growing up around more people that are more urban. You know, you didn't see a lot of tribal regalia and things like that. And then when we moved back to Oklahoma in the mid-'70s or early '70s, we began to see that whole culture that we kind of missed out on growing up.
What was your first experience making art?
My first experience making art was probably in the Dakotas, and I took some. They offered some classes that dealt with art and culture, and then back then I was primarily interested in the outdoors, and I still am. But I remember doing some drawings of animals and some horses. My dad still had those in his collection when he passed. But pardon me, I don't know where that came from. But birds and four-legged animals, those types of things, you know. Yeah.
What kind of exposure did you have to art in primary school?
In primary school, mainly just in books. You know, back then the technology is not what we have today, and so it was more books and occasional visits to local museums and that type of thing. But mainly just books, magazines, if you had the opportunity to see magazines, and then just some, you know, some.
Not really any art lessons per se.
Not necessarily art lessons per se, just you know, occasional school assignment. You know, paint this, draw that, and you just did the best you could.
Right.
Yeah.
How about secondary and high school?
High school, actually, and what's kind of interesting is that I was an athlete growing up, and so in my family were athletes, and that's how we made a distinction, you know, on the reservation, is that we were accepted by becoming athletes and being, you know, pretty decent athletes, and because it was not easy growing up on the reservation because we were a different tribe, and we were outsiders, but being athletes, we were able to be included in, you know, all the activities but
What kinds of athletics did you participate in?
I played it all. Baseball, ran track, played football, basketball, and did a little rodeo. I loved the rodeo, but my parents didn't like that.
I understand.
Yeah, they thought that was too dangerous. I never got hurt riding horses or anything like that, but I broke all kinds of bones and injured myself playing sports. But yeah, the secondary and high school opportunities were vast, and I went to Standing Rock High School first, and they had a pretty good art instructor, and I kind of gravitated to that, and didn't really produce anything, you know, out of that experience. I don't think, as I just kind of dabbling in it a little bit, and still playing the sports. But when I came to Shawnee, we moved back to Shawnee in '82 from Fort Yates, and had an opportunity to start taking some art courses at that time, and that was really what kind of fueled my passion, I guess, because I was not a very good student, and I think some of my earlier teachers would probably roll over in their grave if they're still alive, or just roll their eyes to think that Tony Tiger's an assistant art professor now, and teaching in his own program, but that experience was really eye-opening to me, because I realized that I was good at something other than sports, and so being creative and learning the different processes, and Bill Malone at Shawnee High School was a teacher there. Then also Kim Kimberling was also an instructor there, and learned a lot from them, and they really encouraged me to continue to study, and so I pretty much did.
Did you sort of make a conscious decision that you were maybe going to be an artist, or was it just?
At that time, I was young and rambunctious, and didn't listen to many people like a lot of young people do, and I kind of went through a time, you know, in right after high school, that I you know, just kind of went and did my own thing and made some bad decisions and wasted a lot of time, really, you know, wasted about 7-8 years just having fun. and not really producing anything, and even trying to really learn anything. Just mainly about partying and running around and chasing girls.
So you weren't even selling a few paintings here and there?
Not then, no. But what was interesting about that time is that I still had opportunities to work, and so I worked with Joe Rice, and he did these workshops and teaching students how to bead. And so I got a summer job a couple times helping him as an aide. And so I picked up beading from that, and so I know how to bead, and so I can teach those things, and I still do. So I was doing that, and so I was still around the artwork, but just not in a formal manner. And still I draw a little bit and paint a little bit, but nothing really serious. But I was still kind of dabbling in it, so I never really left it completely, but it was always there. Yeah.
So at some point you decided you were going to go back to school.
That was interesting because I made some bad decisions and really just lived a lifestyle at that time that was not beneficial to life. But I did. I made a decision, and really I knew that I needed to make some changes, and so I got married, and we established a home with my wife Brenda, and it was good. And we enjoyed the time that we had together, and we're still married now, 22 years, but that wasn't enough, just being established in our home, and so it wasn't too long after that I was working in Shawnee at Wolverine Tube, and they made copper tubing, and so one day I was running these machines. And what I would do is that I'd have this cycle, and so in between this cycle you had about 45 seconds to 30 seconds, and so I'd keep a little journal with me, and I would draw, just from memory sometimes. Sometimes I'd have a small photograph, and I would draw, and so one morning this gentleman came, and he was working behind me, and he knew that I was drawing or writing or something in this book, and so he came over and he looked, he said, is that yours? I said, yeah, and he says, what you doing? And I said, I'm drawing. And so he said, can I look in your book? And I said, yeah, go ahead. So he looked through the book, and so he saw some of the drawings, and he says, if you can draw like this, he says, what the hell are you doing here? And then from that time on, I just kind of began to ask myself those important questions about what am I doing here, because I'm bored out of my mind. Factory work, it was just the same thing over and over again. So it wasn't too long after that I quit and began to look at school, and enrolled at Seminole State, and began to study art again.
What was the instruction like at Seminole State?
Seminole State, the teacher down there, professor, is Kelly Kirk, and he did a wonderful job of preparing me and giving me a good foundation about what art could be, and what it is. And he taught both studio and art history, and did a wonderful job. And he taught me how to write a little bit, and how to think about art, and good responses to what I was looking at, and just really fueled the need to go and study further. And so when I finished there, I made some really good grades, and I was older. I was 30, 32 when I finished probably, and so he's the one who really encouraged me to go on and study, and so he said that he said Oklahoma State had a transfer day that you could go up and take your work and take your portfolio and just talk to the instructors. They would look at it, and they may give you a scholarship. And so I went up and ended up receiving a scholarship for my undergraduate work, and so I went to Oklahoma State, and it was a good experience. It was a good experience, not just in the arts, but just in growing up as well, and understanding responsibility and challenge. It was a wonderful challenge because I commuted from Shawnee to Oklahoma State. It was an hour from my house to the parking lot, and sometimes I'd spend all day, taking classes and waiting for another class to start, and so just being patient and learning some of those things. But I did have a wonderful experience at Oklahoma State.
How did your style or subject matter change there?
And what's interesting about, I think when you're studying art, for the most part, you really don't necessarily have a style as you begin that process. You know, you're learning processes, and so I was just taking it all in and just listening and looking and thinking about the possibilities and learning process, and but I was always interested in watercolor and painting, thin media, water media. I was interested in transparency and textures. And so while I was at Oklahoma State, I took a class with Jack Titus, and wonderful watercolor artist, and that's really what kind of grabbed my attention with the intensity of color, and then transparency, because you can overlap and build depth with the watercolor, and that's what he really helped me do. But I think the one guy at Oklahoma State that really was beneficial to me was Mark Sisson. And so Mark was a drawing instructor, or drawing professor, and printmaking instructor, paint professor, and he's the one who really kind of began to see some possibilities in what I was doing. And sometimes I'd have an idea, and he says, "Oh, that might not work out. Maybe you ought to try something else." And I said, "Oh, I think this will." And so I talked him into allowing me to go ahead with the project. And in the end, I'd come out with a pretty decent project and a piece of artwork. And so that happened a couple times. But he really kind of, I think he was really the one who really kind of helped me to begin to understand that I have something. You know, I had something, and my creativity was something that I could probably build on.
Were you entering any competitive shows?
Actually, I was. While I was at Seminole State, Kelly Kirk encouraged me to enter some competitive, just local shows. You know, I think Wewoka had a show, Seminole had a show, Holdenville had a show, and so I entered those and did well, and so I started winning prizes at those. And it got to the point where I don't think they really liked me coming to their show.
Was it with native subject matter?
Primarily it was. It primarily was native subject matter, but I don't think everything was native. I think sometimes I was still, you know, I was kind of experimenting with color movement and in forms a little bit. But I was also at that time, I wasn't primarily a painter. I was kind of dabbling in everything. And Kelly was a strong clay artist. And so I was dabbling in the clay also. I was making the ceramic portraits, and so those were pretty popular. And I began to market, well, not only market those, but sell those after I create a piece or two. And
so they were like pictures, but three-dimensional. Like
yeah,
ceramic?
they were three-dimensional and very lifelike. Sometimes with their mouth open, eyes and teeth, and the whole works. And then every now and then I might stick a small painting inside the mouth, and it would just kind of speak to whatever the individual was expressing.
So then there was another transition to University of Oklahoma for your master's degree. What motivated that move?
Interesting story, you know. And while I was at Seminole State, my mother passed away. And she was very instrumental in my education, as she really wanted the best for her children. And she had 8 children altogether, and I was kind of in the middle and kind of a black sheep, I guess. But she wanted the best for her children, and she understood that education was gonna be one of those things that would be beneficial to her children. And but she passed away when I was at Seminole State, and while I was attending OSU, my father died.
Close together.
Yeah, but they were good people. They were good people, and they did well by us. And even though neither one of them really were educated, I think both received their GEDs later in life. And then when my dad was 50, he went back and got an associate's degree when he was on the Standing Rock Reservation. And he was very instrumental and inspirational, and helping me to understand that if he could do that at 50, I could do it at 30. And so I went and I began to take my studies serious. But he did die, and it was right at a time when I was pretty close to finishing my degree and at OSU, and actually I just walked away at that time. I got through the semester, and he passed away like I think a week before finals, and I think I even missed a final. And but I had talked to the professor, and he understood what was going on, and so he allowed me to make up the final that I had missed. And but I walked away from OSU, but I had a wonderful experience there, and I went into youth ministry for a time, and so I was a youth pastor at a large church in Oklahoma City, and I did that for a couple of years, but I was still making artwork at the time. I was still making artwork, and got more involved in the ceramics and making the ceramic masks, and so there's probably like two years before I went back. But what I was doing, I was working in Oklahoma City, just down the street from the Oklahoma Indian Art Gallery, and so one day I walked in there and showed, I think Robert Taylor was the manager then, and just had a load of work, and I said, hey man, let me take a look at this stuff, and I'm interested, and I'm looking for a place to be represented. And he was a really nice guy, very cordial, and he said, yeah, I'll take a look at it. And so he looked at it, and he kind of liked what he saw, and then he asked, he said, can you leave these here? I said, yeah, I can leave this here. I said, I think the owner would like to take a look at this work, and so I left it there, and began a relationship at the Oklahoma Indian Art Gallery in Doris Littrell, and so that was during the part where I was kind of searching and thinking about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, but like I said, I was still making artwork, and so I got curious after I did the youth ministry work for a couple of years, and kind of found some relief, and I did a degree check to find out how many hours I had on my BFA, and so come to find out I only lacked 10 hours, and it was all foreign language.
Oh.
Yeah, foreign language. I tried to take Spanish at OSU, but the teacher taught. She never spoke in English, and it was just all in Spanish, and I just could not do that, and so I had to withdraw from that class. But I found out that it was just 10 hours, and I was interested in language at that time, and so I knew that the OU was offering Muskogee Creek language, and so I went down and applied, got into OU. And I asked OU if I was able to maybe study the Muskogee Creek language and transfer those last 10 hours back to OSU to receive my BFA, and they agreed. And so that was
wonderful.
So I did that, but while I was at OU, working on that degree requirement, I happened to be walking by the School of Art. And said, I need to go just walk in here and see what's going on. And so I walked in and had a chance to talk to one of the painting instructors. And I think later on I met Mary Jo,
Mary Jo Watson.
Mary Jo Watson, yes. And she wasn't the director then. She was just one of the professors there. And so I started taking a class, and so I became a half-time student. And so I was still doing some youth ministry work and making another commute from Shawnee to Oklahoma City to Norman and then back to Shawnee. And so I did that for for about a year, I guess, until I finished my language requirement. And but I got connected with a gentleman by the name of George Hughes. And he was a professor there in the painting department, and he was from Ghana, Africa. And so he's a black gentleman and really a tremendous artist. And he's the guy who really, I think, at that point in my career, that he really began to help me to see that it's not always the most gifted artist who's successful. It's the artist who has the most drive and is in the right place at the right time. And so he really inspired me to work hard and to study and to learn all I could, and to start exhibiting a little bit, and not being afraid to push things a little further than most people would like. And so I began to really work hard, and it wasn't too long after that, after I received my BFA, that he said, you need to apply for graduate school. But during that process, I realized that I couldn't go right into graduate school because I had some financial responsibilities I needed to take care of, and so I stayed out a year, and it was pretty competitive. I knew that there was some competitiveness in getting into the program, and I wanted to do everything myself, and so I know that there were some students that were having professional photographs taken of their work, and it was kind of a God thing, I guess, and I just said, if you want me to do this, I'm gonna do everything myself, and I'm gonna do my own photographs, take my own photographs, learn how to do that, and do my own writing. I think I had a little bit of help. Somebody's kind of reread what I've written, and gave me some ideas about what to change. But and so I applied for graduate school at OU, and got it. And I had a wonderful time at OU. At the time, George was still there. George was there. Had a chance to befriend and meet Mary Jo Watson, who was teaching primarily American Indian arts, art history courses, and had a chance to meet her. And then there was other artists, native artists, who were there at the program. Marvin Begay, Heather Autone was there working on their master's degrees. Gerald Canoyer was there. Shane Brown was there, and myself. And so it wasn't like you were culturally there by yourself, and so you had people around you who understood where you were coming from, and maybe even part of your identity as an individual. And so we had a wonderful time, and we exhibited together, and we could talk to each other. And pardon me, we never really did any collaborations, but it was good to just bounce ideas off each other and encourage each other. And I think we did a couple group shows together, and so we had a pretty good time at OU.
Did you were you thinking at all about the possibility you might teach as well?
I did. That's really when I began to kind of think about teaching. We talked about finances a little bit earlier, and trying to be responsible. And at that time, wasn't making a lot of money, but I was selling artwork, and my wife was working full time, but we began to sell a little bit of artwork at that time. But also some different individuals would encourage me to. He said, you ought to teach. That way we could help pay some of your tuition, and so I was taking a class with the director at the time, and so he said, you can write anything you want to me, and you write me a letter about art. And so I wrote him a letter and asked him for a job, and said I'd like to have a job. I'd like to teach one of the courses here, and so he responded to it, and he says, all right. He says, next semester you can teach a painting class or a drawing class. And so I ended up being a TA. As a grad student, and taught beginning drawing, beginning painting, art for non-majors, and then I worked up in one of the woodshop lab, and taught students how to use the machinery and build stretchers and build other types of stretchers. Yeah.
That's a great teaching background to have. So after you graduated, were you sort of primarily trying to earn your living as an artist? And
I think that was my plan. Well, it was my plan. It was my plan to do that. My plan was out of graduate school was to primarily try to make a living in my art. And at that time, the economy was probably doing well enough that an artist probably could make a living off his art.
Because we're talking the mid-90s here.
Yeah, mid-90s. Yeah. 2007 actually was when I finished grad school, and so it was good, and I was selling artwork, and so I was going to shows, doing.
What were some of the shows?
I was doing the OOHRP at that time. I'd go out to the Santa Fe market, the swine market, and show there. I was showing at Doris's at the same time, the Oklahoma Indian Art Gallery. And then I was also, to get in different competitions, any competition I could, basically. And then I was going down to Florida and showing in the museum market that they have down there. And so that's what I was doing that. I was on the way back from that market in Florida.
What's the name of the market?
It's the name of their museum. I don't want to butcher the name, but it's at Big Cypress, Indian Museum there on the reservation, the Seminole Reservation. And so it was on our way home, and I received a phone call from Ruthie Blaylock Jones, and it's kind of a funny story. Every time I'd see her, she never remembered me. I don't think from the time I was at Bacone. I was there for a short time.
Yeah.
And but every time I would see her, I'd tell her, hey, I'm getting ready to working on my master's degree, and what's your name? And I'd say Tony Tiger. And I went to Bacone. Okay, yeah, I remember you. And so, but every time I'd see her at a market, I'd just kind of refresh her mind that I was working on my master's degree. And then finally one day I was in Santa Fe, and the year before, and I said, I'm graduating in May. I'll be looking for a job. And she goes, oh, okay. And who are you again? But it paid off, because I was in the fall of 2007. Returning home from the Seminole Reservation in Florida. She gave me a call, and she said, "Hey, Mr. Tiger, is this Mr. Tiger?" And I said, "Yes, it is." I said, she goes, so she introduced herself again and said, I would like you to come and teach at Bacone as an adjunct. And so we were still living in Shawnee, and so I agreed, and so I drove from Shawnee to Bacone, to Muskogee, probably about 100 miles or so, and twice a week to teach 2 classes. And so I taught the American Indian Arts and Craft course, and then I also talked her into allowing me to teach a special course on concepts. And we had, I think I had 4 students. And so the program at that time at Bacone was definitely not bright. Few students, a lot of students didn't even know that they had an art program. And so, but we had the students that were there. They were good students, and they were willing to learn. And so we had a good time. I had a good time teaching the small amount of students that we had. And at the end of the semester, she said, I'm retiring. You want this job? And I said, well, I'll talk to somebody about it. I'm not sure if they're going to give it to me, but I'll talk to them about a job. And so she talked to whoever she needed to talk to, and then they asked me to come in for an interview, and I talked my way to a job at Bacone College as their art director, and because I had my master's degree, assistant professor.
That's wonderful. So you had some history at Bacone already.
I did have some history, and it actually went back further than that, because my grandfather, he went to school at Bacone, had a wonderful experience there. He understood the ideas behind education and knowledge, and that was going to be very beneficial to his grandchildren. And so he always wanted someone to go to school at Bacone. And so I did go to Bacone right out of high school. I didn't mention that earlier, but I didn't stay very long. It was in 1984 in the fall, and I just graduated high school. And at that time, I think they were still just, they were in a transition period from where Ruthie had taken over and Dick West was on his way out. And so I had Dick for a class, and probably not the best situation for a freshman to be in a class where there was a lot of leeway. And so I don't think I took a lot from that class. And then Ruthie was teaching some drawing courses, which I took, but even that, there wasn't enough going on the campus to really keep my attention, and so I only stayed for 1 semester. And because of some of the issues with the classes, I realized that I could probably get more out of going to the library, and basically that's what I did. So I didn't return in the spring semester, and just began to live the life that I lived during that time, and yeah.
Now that you're an art director and you're teaching these classes at Bacone, what are some of the things that you're maybe is your work with the students impacting your work at all?
I think as a professor of art, it causes you to think more closely about what you're doing as an artist. Before, my ideas were we'll make a lot of artwork so I could go sell at these markets and to collectors. Now that I have fewer opportunities, less time to make art, it's more precise. I'm dealing with what I really want to do, new ideas that I have. And so I'm more precise and particular about what I'm doing. Even though it may be small, there's still something there that I'm trying to challenge myself by thinking of design elements or even applications of paint. Really thinking about the small piece in that is the process or the content worthy of taking it to a larger scale. And so that's kind of what I'm doing today. And but the students, I don't really think they inspire me to do work, but it probably just the idea of not having enough time to work causes me to really to value my time. And so they'll tell you too. I tell them my time is money, and so. They know that if they want to talk to me, they have a limited chance an opportunity to talk to me, but I do make myself available to them. But I'm working. They know that I'm working. Yeah.
And what do you try to communicate to them in terms of art instruction?
I think the major point that I like to make, and it's not just even to just the art students, but to every student who comes in, because we do have a mixture of non-majors with majors, is that they're in the educational portion of their career. No matter what you're doing, this is the time for you to really learn and to take your high school education to the next level, and you will utilize a lot of this information, as a student, whatever it is. And because we're at a liberal arts school, they have an opportunity to study a lot of different things and to grasp a lot of different knowledge. And so I really try to encourage my students to think more seriously about their education. If it's in the arts or if not in some other area, so that they can really be able to do what they want to do once they get out into the professional areas. Because not only do I paint, but because of my attention, I think my paying attention to other areas in the arts, I'm able to do other things. And so not only do I just make art, but I teach, I can lecture a little bit more, I curate exhibitions, and so do a little bit more of that as well. And so it's not just about making art, but it's also about what I'm doing in the art world, away from just making artwork. And I think it's very important. But I think paying attention and trying to gain all the information that I could, even from the art history courses, it's really helped me to do those things.
Is there still a native art component to the program?
There is a native art component to the program. And so there's a class called American Indian Arts and Craft, and the AIS group teaches that, or degree teaches that more as a lecture theory course. And but we had an opportunity to go just pure theory and just look at books and read about information about American Indian art. But as a studio professor, I really wanted to make sure that we still held on to some of those techniques, and so we still offer a studio course in beading. So we do some beading. We bring in some potters. We bring in basket weavers. This coming semester, we're going to bring in Molly Murphy, who works in soft materials and beads, and so she's going to be a visiting artist. And so Michael Elizondo Jr. is actually teaching that for us this semester, and he's a recent graduate of OU with his master's degree. So the ideas of native art is still alive at Bacon.
I know you have a friendship with Bobby Martin, and it's been important to you personally, but also I think you guys have collaborated a bit. Can you talk about how you and Bobby met?
Oh yeah. And I met Bob actually through Ruthie. I remember the first semester that I came over. she allowed me to organize the student exhibition, and so I didn't really know anybody in the area, and we work on a limited budget, being a small school, and so we try to utilize professionals in our own area in Northeast Oklahoma. And so she suggested that we use Bob Martin to come and judge the exhibition. And I said, okay. And I really didn't know Bob.
Was he still at NSU at that
At
point?
that time, I think he had just moved to John Brown University. And I think it was like his first year there. It was my first year at Bacone. And so he, I didn't know him. I didn't know his work either. And so he exhibited a piece in the show along with, actually no, what happened? I guess he did. I think we had a couple of pieces by Ruthie and a couple of pieces by him out in the foyer, and then inside the small gallery was our student show. And so so I saw his work, and it incorporated photographs and text, and I thought that was pretty interesting, because I'd never really seen that too much of that from a native artist. I guess there were a few who were doing that, but and so he came over and judged the show, and so we began to talk, and we were both Muskogee Creek, and we both were kind of older when we went back to school, but we definitely had a passion for the artwork and for teaching and for people, and then we also have a religious background that we both agree with, and so we could meet and connect on a lot of different ways, elements, and so we became friends, and it wasn't too long after that someone asked me to show at Bacone, because they wanted to know who their new director was after I became the director at Bacone. And so someone came and they asked if one of the professors there on campus said, "Well, we'd like to see some of your work. When are you going to exhibit?" Because by that time I had already curated a couple exhibitions by I think Tom Fields, the photographer, came in. He did a show, and I think the next year we did an exhibition with three ladies, and so Anita Fields, Heidi Big Knife, and then Sylvia and Eddie Hunter. They came in and did a female show, and wonderful time. And then someone asked if I would do something, and so and I could have did a one-man show, but I said no. I want to bring somebody else in. And by then I had seen a few pieces of Bob's, and so I asked him if he'd like to do a two-man show, and so we did a two-man show at Bacone. And then because he also worked at John Brown, they have a nice exhibition space, and so the show started at Bacone, and then it went to John Brown University, and then I think we showed it again someplace. But so we had 3 opportunities to show together, same work. But we really found that we could work together and had common values, and we could stand each other. And so we've continued to collaborate, and we continue to collaborate to this day.
You did a show at the Capitol in 2010. What was the title and theme of the show?
That show was titled Full Consciousness, and it really kind of speaks to the idea of how mankind is created. Not only do we have a physical body, but we also have a mental capacity to learn and to understand, and then also we have a spiritual component to who we are. And so that's what that was really about. It was about the full idea of who man is, and had a wonderful time putting the work up, getting the work ready for that.
How many works did you do?
Oh gee, I think there were about a dozen pieces, maybe a few more. Maybe.
Mostly new pieces?
Not really. It was kind of more retrospective. Pieces about 3 years old. And so I had a chance to show some new work, along with some older pieces, but mainly primarily new work. Yeah, and had some nice comments, and I was really new at Bacone too, and so I did a lot. I had a lot set up, thinking about making a living just as an artist, and so I had these things set up before I even agreed to become the director and teach at Bacone. And I had these things right after another in 1 year, and so I had a lot going on at that time, wow. Teaching, directing, and making artwork and exhibiting, and so I was a very busy man.
Right.
Yeah.
The selling part of the art business is sometimes the trickiest. Did you What's the best business advice you ever got?
The best business advice that I ever received. Well, while I was at the Oklahoma Indian Art Gallery, there was a number of artists in that group. Robert Taylor, Merlin Little Thunder, Virginia Stroud, Jay Benham, Benjamin Harjo Jr., and a few others. And these people, you know, they even though I was the young guy and I was working on a master's degree, they welcomed me, and we talked, and a lot of those people gave me advice and encouraged me to continue. Excuse me, but that was really the main thing, was that they encouraged me to continue, and they and I watched them. You know, and I think Robert Taylor was probably the most instrumental in giving me advice about selling and pricing things and what he thought, and actually there's a Robert Taylor on that wall, but he was probably the most instrumental, and it was just not just one thing that he said, but it was all that he had said, and that was pretty interesting because earlier as a young artist, I think when I was dabbling in the arts and I was doing probably more beadwork. And I was interested in art making. I had approached a few artists who were older, and they wouldn't give me the time of day. They would say I would ask them a question, and they would just kind of blow me off and say, you know, I learned this stuff on my own, and you're going to go learn this stuff on your own, and I'm not going to give you any help. And so I didn't have that reaction there at the Oklahoma City Indian Art Gallery, and I really appreciated that. And it was a very important aspect to my professional career, and so now that same philosophy I kind of hold. I really try to hang on to that philosophy. It's not just about me and what I'm doing. It's about what's going on around me in the art world. And so you're looking at my house, and so you see all the work that I've collected from other artists. And so just last night, Michael Elizondo Jr. Came to my house to stay because he lives in Oklahoma City. And I offered a bedroom, and he said, "Yeah, I'll stay." And so we came in kind of late in the evening, and he said, "Hey, I got a couple pieces of artwork in my car." And I said, "Well, bring them in." I said, "Bring them in. We'll take a look at them." And he had just entered the holiday show that the Cherokee Nation puts on, and he won a Judge's Choice ribbon for a painting that he has. And so that was the painting that I liked, and I guess he brought him in because he wanted to trade something, and so we ended up trading a couple of pieces of artwork, and so we traded some artwork, and so I have another piece now from another artist, and I think that's really I think something I really enjoy is I can barter, you know, my artwork for somebody else's artwork, and we both get something good. But it's also about building and supporting other artists and their ideas, and really just trying to be supportive in the art world. And I don't think that was always the way. You know, it was so competitive. But I think that attitude is beginning to change, and hopefully that's something that I'll be remembered for. Trying to change that attitude of exclusion, and just, you know, try to promote the ideas of contemporary Native work, and so I have a lot of good friends who are artists, and so we're continuing to work on some projects even now.
It's wonderfully put. I noticed that you're in an exhibit that's just going around right now, changing hands. Would you like to talk about that exhibit?
Yes, that would be a good topic. It's just really a wonderful opportunity to be a part of that exhibition. I believe it's 85 artists, over 100 pieces of artwork, and so the exhibition opened back in June 2012 at the Museum of Art and Design in New York City, and Ellen Taubman is the co-curator. She primarily did a lot of the legwork. And so this is the third installment. I'm not sure if it's the last installment, but I think it is. And so they did the Southwest artist first, and it's been a decade since the first exhibition.
Wow.
And then they did the Central Plains artists, and then now they're doing the Eastern artists. And so it was very, very interesting to go to New York City. So we went for the opening, and
Was it your first?
it was my first
Real
trip.
visit?
Yeah, it was my first trip. But I'm definitely a rural kind of guy. I like the open spaces, and I like the fresh air, and the landscape of eastern Oklahoma. And but going to New York City, I really gained a great appreciation for Oklahoma. but it was interesting. It was interesting, and we had an opportunity to do all the things, the sightseeing, and had an opportunity to visit the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and also MoMA. We did that, and then we went to the opening, and then we did all the other New York tourist things. We went down to the 9/11 Memorial. We did that, and then we went to Ellis Island, Statue of Liberty, and ate some expensive food. And rode in some cabs, some death rides in cabs, and interesting times. But definitely had a good time. And but to be able to take part in the exhibition is really it's really, I think, what artists really live for. To be included in some of these major exhibitions. And but this body of work deals with mainly contemporary Native artists or contemporary art created by Native artists, and not necessarily two-dimensional work. A lot of it was conceptual ideas, sculpture, three-dimensional work, and so very interesting to see that type of work from Native artists. And so, and there were a few emerging artists and some established artists. Primarily, not everyone was educated with an art background, but I think most were. And so, very interesting to see the ideas that the artists from the East had, and heard that it was probably one of the stronger shows of the three. But that's subjective. But it was very interesting. A lot of mixed media, video. And new materials that artists were using, wax, found objects, fibers, but not woven. I mean, sometimes they would just be suspended, and then taking some of the old media and then weaving photographs, different things like that. So very, very powerful exhibition, I think. And so we'll travel for the next 3.5 years. I believe to 8 different venues, and I think one of the venues is in Canada, and I think they're still working on. It's right now. It's not coming to Oklahoma, but we're hoping that they might work something out so where it can come to Oklahoma. I think the closest right now would probably be Indianapolis to the OOHRP Museum, or else also to. And the other closest venue would be Santa Fe at the Contemporary Museum of Indian Art.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. It needs to come to Oklahoma.
Yes, it does.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your creative process and techniques. Are you primarily working with acrylic on canvas?
Right now, no. I don't think I have worked on a canvas piece in quite a while. If I do, it's not a stretch canvas on a typical stretch, lightweight stretch canvas stretcher. If I do, I like the firmness of board, because Masonite board. But if I want to work on canvas for the texture, I will glue it down to a piece of board, whether it's wood or just a Masonite, over a 3-dimensional structure. And I really do. I like the firmness of it, and then I don't have to worry about someone sticking their finger through it, or somebody accidentally doing something to the surface. And so it's kind of rigid, and yeah, I like that.
And acrylics then?
Acrylics, primarily acrylics, yes. And so earlier I stated that I was really interested in watercolor at OSU. I did a lot of watercolor, took a few watercolor courses, and some special studies with the watercolor instructor. And but he later on, I realized that the watercolor itself would lose its intensity when you applied it to paper. And I really like the intensity of color. Um, maybe it's about my own personality, but I think a lot of it too has something to do with the regalia that Native people wear. Very beautiful combinations of colors, and I think Native people really well, they want to be recognized, and so those colors really attribute to that. And so I also like the colors, the intensity of color, and so I was painting on paper, and so one day, I think it was when I was at OU, and it may have been George Hughes. He said, you ought to paint with, because at the time I was painting with watercolor quite a bit. He said, you ought to try painting with acrylics. He said, you can do the same thing with acrylics that you do with watercolor, but once an acrylic dries, it's permanent, and the intensity a lot of times stays, and you won't lose it, and you can build up or even take away if you wanted to while it's still wet on paper. And so I began to kind of experiment with the acrylics, and there's a lot of different things that you can do with it. It's a very versatile medium. A lot of different polymers that you can add to it. So if you want to extend it, there's extenders that you can make it like work a little bit like oil paints. You can thin it down. You can change the sheen. You can make it thick, and it's transparent. And so there's a lot of different things that you can do with acrylics, and I think that's probably why I like it. Oil paint dries. It takes a little while for oil paint to dry. Maybe I'm not that patient, and so the acrylics is something that you can paint with very quickly also, and so I think it's why I really like it. But right now, primarily acrylic paint.
And I'm glad you mentioned Native regalia, because it used to be that some of your bright colors reminded me of patchwork a little bit, Seminole patchwork, but I see you incorporating some ribbon work designs right around the image. Do you want to talk about when you started doing that?
Oh, sure. And it goes back to, I think, the ideas behind, back to where I grew up. And so I was born in LA, and we grew up mainly around urban Indians, and so we didn't see a whole lot of regalia. But later on, as we moved back to Oklahoma in the mid-70s or early 70s, we began to attend dances and some cultural events, and we had access to more traditional dress, and so the colors that I saw and the patterns that I saw, the motifs that they were being used in the patchwork, and how they used them, and different cultures used them differently. I think the Sac and Fox used them a little bit more vertical. And then there was a combination of these geometric shapes along with very organic lined images, and so that I was really kind of drawn to that because I am such an outdoorsman. I like to hunt and fish, and love spending time outside when I can. Even take my students outside, and we do organic observations in class, and so the outdoors has definitely influenced that idea behind some of the designs I incorporate now, and so and even learning how to do that. My grandmother, who was full-blood Sac and Fox, she lived north of Shawnee, and so I visit her every now and then, and so I just asked her. I said, well, how did the Sac and Fox come up with her ideas for ribbon work designs? And so she grabbed a newspaper, and she grabbed a pair of scissors, and she said, this is how they do it. And so she folded the paper in half, and she began to cut away and cut a simple design. And then she opened it up, and she said, well, this is how they start. And so from that idea, I really never really left me. And so even now, and probably even more now, I'm thinking about taking those woodland designs and creating my own, and building the designs and incorporating into the work. And even taking it even further, and so thinking about new media where illuminating things from behind is a new area that I'm kind of looking at right now. And so taking transparent images and some nice lines, line work, and then illuminated from the back.
So it wouldn't be on board at that point?
It would probably be on plexiglass.
Interesting. Plexiglass.
And so the new media, the new ideas, new concepts that we're coming up with are very interesting, and that's part of the part of what you see as an artist, and so I don't think well, I don't think we steal things from other artists, but we can be inspired by other artists and by what they're doing, and just see the possibilities of what you could do with that and take it to the next level in your own work.
You're also doing some three-dimensional painting.
I am, and so I'm taking not just the two-dimensional form of equal sides, rectangles, but taking and creating three-dimensional triangles and rectangles and all the other geometric shapes that are not necessarily rectangles, and also creating recessed areas and raised areas, and it's a little difficult to work with because you're so familiar with working in 2 dimensions, and as you begin to work in 3, you have to think about more space and more planes to work in, and so it's a challenge, but I really like it, and so as people come in and look at the new pieces, they definitely make an impact, and so that's the first piece that people mainly walk to, is to the new work that I'm doing, that it is not rectangular.
So you mentioned how one of your professors sort of honed in on this, you loved color and acrylics would be a good step. Since you started using acrylics, do you think your palette has changed much?
It probably has a little bit, and even now, I think I'm still exploring color. Color is something that is very mysterious. It takes a long time to fully understand combinations of color sometimes, and especially if you do a lot of layers of things. And so there's a lot of layering that goes into the work that I'm doing right now, and even underpainting and adding colors on top of colors, and then next to colors, and it really is a challenge, and to be satisfied with it. But not only that, but even some of the underpainting that I'm doing when I pour on wet artwork, and then I may use some other type of material to hold the paint there to infuse and to create other lines, other rectilinear lines in the underpainting, and then coming back and painting on top of those with designs, and is really, it's part of exploration that an artist does, and right now I'm working on some small pieces just to kind of see whether or not this design element or this combination of colors is worthy to take it to a larger piece. And so, I'm doing a lot of that right now, and so from this small body of work, larger pieces will be created, I think, in the next couple of years, next couple of months or whatever, and then also incorporating other ideas, concepts with illumination.
What is your creative process from the time you get an idea?
My creative process begins with reading, writing, observation. I like to read. Didn't like to read as a kid. As a child, I did not like to read, and I see this a lot in young men. We don't read primarily. We like to watch and play sports and be active and be outside, and so reading is something that I see even in my students, that the guys don't like to do a lot of that. And so I'm constantly encouraging them to read and to build their vocabulary. But as I read more, and so I read primarily, the main book that I read is the Bible, but I like to read philosophy and different people who speak about philosophy and religion, history. I like to read a lot of history, and so those so that information plays an important part in the content of what I'm doing, and I think that every artist works from a different viewpoint. It's not always, well, I'm going to paint, so I'm going to just come up with an idea and paint something. I think subject matter, content, and then form are the 3 components, and some just start painting, and then something evolves from that. Some people have an idea about an image, but for me it's a little bit of everything. It just depends on what I'm doing. So from visually researching things, from nature or photographs, I like photographs, old photographs, and then also the writing that I'm reading plays an important part. Now I'm incorporating a little bit more text in my work, not a lot, definitely dates. And so if you look at some of their current work, there's dates incorporated into it, because I really,
Historical date.
historical dates primarily, yeah, to kind of get a sense
That
of time.
will trigger associations.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is that for Native Americans, the dates means something specific, but to non-natives, they also represent something that's significant to them. And so I've had that happen a couple of times. I thought that was pretty interesting. That for me, it represented a certain time, but it also for them, for non-natives, it also represented a different time and event in their life or in history. But yeah, so the process is definitely there's not one element that I gravitate to. It's kind of a combination of different things. And not only that, it's the collaborations, the opportunities to speak with other artists. And so I'm part of a group called the Southeastern Indian Artists Association, or SIA. And so there's quite a few Native artists that we get together. Last night we actually had a meeting and talked about some issues and talked about art. And so we and primarily most of the artists have some type of art background or art education. And so it's kind of interesting that we can really bounce off some pretty challenging ideas around each other, and see where we could take those. And so it's really fun. We have a good time doing that, and there's a strong body of artists there, and those are some of the artists that I also I use when I curate exhibitions. And so just to name a few of the artists is Bobby Martin, Troy Jackson, Joseph Erb, Roy Boney, and then now Michael Elizondo Jr. And then there's a few other artists too here that are around that we'd like to incorporate into to different shows, but primarily those gentlemen that I get to see on a regular basis, and we just kind of I don't think we necessarily feed off each other, but or borrow from each other, but we do encourage each other with what we're doing ourselves, and it gives them the courage to really kind of push the envelope a little bit. And so right now, like Troy Jackson, he works with me at Big Hone, and we see each other every week. But we always try to spend a little time just talking about artwork and what's going on, and what we could do together, or just whatever, and encourage each other. And then new artists too. That idea of not excluding but including young artists is very important to that collaboration, to that effort as we move forward as artists.
What's your creative routine?
My creative routine, it's a challenge now that I'm a director of a small program, and then I teach quite a few hours. I generally, and it's been very, very good that Bacon understands that I need to spend some time in my studio, and so they're very lenient with my time, and try to give as much as I can to Bacon, but I also need to spend time in my studio. And so I in my garage, I have set up a table saw building area where I can build things. It's not perfect, but it's doable. And then I'll open my garage door, pull up to my truck, and take my cutting instruments out there, and so I'll cut with my miter box and my table saw and other hand tools. But I do enjoy it when the weather is nice and the temperature is agreeable. I enjoy being outside and seeing just the fresh air, birds, and all that good stuff. But then I work in the house as well. I have a finishing studio, which is basically an extra bedroom, but it's set up pretty nice, and have a nice easel and a nice rack. It has all my materials and equipment in it. And then even sometimes in this living room where we're sitting, I will, especially the small pieces, I may do some finishing in here because I have some nice windows that give me some good light. But I like to get up early and take a walk, take my dog for a walk, make a pot of coffee, generally pray, do a little reading, and then I'm ready to go, and then I start painting. and usually spend the rest of the day painting. Sometimes my wife will see me in one spot when she leaves, and then she'll come home for lunch and she'll say, "You're still in that same spot." And I said, "I'm still working." And then she'll leave and go back to work, and then she'll come home and I'm still in that same spot. And she said, "Didn't you do anything today?" And I said, "Yeah, hon, I worked on like 5 pieces today." So sometimes she doesn't realize the work that I do, but she likes the benefits of what we receive from it. But the process is definitely is good. I really enjoy what I do, and being able to be creative and use the talents and the gifts that the Creator's given me is really worth living. Yeah.
And you have a project you're excited about that's coming up.
Yes, right now I have numerous things that I'm kind of working on, and so I hope to be. I'm kind of looking at different curation opportunities, and so I'm kind of talking to some different people in different cities outside of Oklahoma about curating some contemporary Native shows. And don't want to say anything right now because they're not finalized, but definitely looking outside of Oklahoma. Minneapolis is a city that I'm interested in. Chicago, another place that I'm interested in. Maybe LA. Seattle, another place that I'm interested in maybe curating some Native work from primarily the northeast Oklahoma area. I think we have a really strong body of artists here, and so I'm thinking about trying to get us out further than just in Oklahoma or even in Santa Fe. So doing that, and actually, repeat your question again. I kind of got off on that.
Well, you just mentioned that you had an upcoming project you were.
Oh, the project, yeah. So curation is definitely something I do, but and then also the collaboration that I'm working on with Bob Martin, and so we're spending some time out at his studio. He has a nice little place just east of Tahlequah here, along the Illinois River, and so we go out and. He has it set really nice, and so we just go out and hang out sometimes and talk. But he had some metal, some sheet metal with some dolls roll names inscribed or cut out with a plasma cutter, and he had created a piece for the water show that I helped co-curate along with America Meredith and Heather Ottone. And the water show, we brought together 18 artists, contemporary artists from Oklahoma that had some kind of connection, or they lived in Oklahoma. And so the AH2O water show dealt with issues, native issues with the water in Oklahoma. And so we had printmakers, painters, but Mr. Martin created a water piece. And so he built a box. Then he put a water pump in the box, and he had a piece of steel that was horizontal, and it had these holes cut out. And then he had two little holes that looked like maybe photographs could fit inside. And so he's also working in encaustic on paper, and so wax on paper. And so he created a light box with water running through the cut out holes of the steel. Wow. And then he incorporated two small paintings, encaustic pieces, into the openings, but he also illuminated it from inside. And so it had water and illumination and metal and steel and paper and wood, and so it was a very strong piece in the water show. So we had some other steel laying around the studio, and so we were in there talking one day after we had I just came back from giving a noontime lecture at the Philbrook. Christina Burke had just put up an exhibition called Seeking the Sacred, and so she had some religious work and spiritual work from different artists from the area, and she asked me if I'd give a noontime lecture on it, and so I did. It's basically a subjective response to what I saw, but so after that we kind of had this idea of spirituality, thinking about our ancestors and how they had passed on their belief to us. And it's not the typical, native belief in spiritualism, but it's it's Christian. And so I saw the names, and some of those guys were some of the first Christians in his family. And so I said, why don't we why don't we build a grave house, a Muskogee Creek grave house, and full size, and so the idea just began to grow, and so what we're going to do is we're going to build a Muskogee Creek grave house, and then we're going to attach the steel with the cutout names to the openings around the sides of the grave house, and then we're going to use wood to kind of make it look like a structure, an older structure, and then we're going to illuminate the inside of the grave house with light, and then on the top where the roof would be, what we're going to do is we're going to use a transparent, maybe plexiglass or maybe some other type of transparent plastic, and we're going to the shingles are going to be individual paintings, drawings, photographs of our ancestors, and have that illuminated. And so very an interesting piece, definitely conceptual, incorporating light and drawings, paintings, photographs, but also but not a whole lot of painting. Just this more construction and concept. Right. And so very interesting piece, I think, and so that's what we're working on right now. And so very different, but we got those ideas from looking at contemporary work, and even non-native work, just ideas, and so that's kind of where we're heading right now, and so I'm very excited about it, and then also Mr. Martin is working on an exhibition down in the Sequoia National Research Center on the University of Arkansas Little Rock campus, and so he's going to curate an exhibition of native printings. Different types of prints, and so he's going to draw from the Bill Wiggins collection. Mr. Wiggins didn't realize how many prints that he has, and so he has quite a few. And so he's going to use a few of his pieces, but also some of the artists who are in Mr. Wiggins' collection. He's asked if they would contribute a piece to the printed piece to the exhibition. Do you have a piece? I'm actually getting ready to work on it. Yeah, artists notorious for bringing it to the very end, and so I'm working on the monotype for the piece. And actually I'm going to go out to Bob's studio on Sunday, this coming Sunday, and work on some of that. But yeah, so I'm very, very excited about being an artist right now, and being creative, and being part of an art world of really good artists. And so, yeah, so I'm excited about the future.
That's wonderful. Well, if there's anything else you'd like to add or talk about, we can do that, and otherwise we'll move on and look at your artwork.
All right. No, just really in closing, it's been a good trip. The opportunities I've had to make something of my life. And really it goes back to all the individuals in my life, not just my parents, but the instructors, the professors at the institutions, other artists. And family members who are no longer with us. But I have a really blessed life. The Creator's given me a life to live, and I've been able to really be able to receive major blessings, I think, from that, from my spiritual life and understanding of who we are as people, and being able to do the things I've done, and still plan to do. I was probably the least likely out of my family to succeed as an individual. Definitely go on to be able to go as far as I did in my education, but a lot of individuals played a part in it, and very thankful for that. And And I would just encourage, anybody out there who may see this material, my tears aren't tears of weakness. They are tears of appreciation for what I do have. And if any native person sees this information or sees this video, I just want to encourage them that, what happened to our people in the past, it was tragic that it happened the way it did, and that many of our people no longer exist. Whole tribes and whole clans are gone. But we are still here. We are still here. And the Creator gave us that. He gave us an opportunity to live and to express ourselves, and to remind people that that as a Native people, we still matter, and we can still contribute to this world, and to the understanding that there's more to life than just the physical, and that we should definitely be passing on what we know to the next generation, so that they too can find their place in the world and in their occupation. So I just want to say thanks to the University of Oklahoma State University, because I've received a wonderful opportunity to study art there, and it was really just a major blessing to be able to do that, and they helped prepare me to go on and take the next step in my art career, and really, to be able to say that is just wonderful, and I'm very pleased with how life has turned out so far. I'm looking forward to the future.
Thank you for sharing that, Tony. Okay, would you like to talk about this piece, Tony?
Yes, this piece is an acrylic painting on stretched canvas over board or panel. It's 24 inches wide by 48 inches tall, and the piece is titled "Friendship and Protection," and so you'll see this red outline and kind of area of an individual. Some people look at it and don't necessarily see the individual first, but the content of the piece really deals with the dates in the piece. And so 1789 is when the Sauk and Fox were first introduced to a relationship to the U.S. government. And so there were some Sauks at one of the forts. I think it's Fort Harmon, and so they were just there at the fort at this time when the U.S. government was trying to create these relationships with some of the local natives in the area, and really they had no authority to sign anything, but because they were at the fort, they signed a document and or put their mark on it, and we had Sac and Fox here, we had Sauks here, or Meskwaki, or the Foxes, and so we had a group here. And so by them being there, they just kind of basically initiated them into a relationship with the federal government, and really just began to turn and change their way of life as that relationship continued to foster. Many thousands and maybe millions of acres were ceded away to the U.S. government, and so in reading some of the treaty. I read in the treaty this one major part in the first paragraph. It talked about friendship and protection, and so it's kind of not necessarily a good thing because of all the land that was ceded away at that time, and then later on in the 1830s with the Black Hawk. They call it a war. It really wasn't a war. It was just Black Hawk was trying to free his people and take them to freedom, and a lot of the people died in that incident, and even some of the political leaders wrote about there was really never a war. It was just them trying to chase this group of people down, and in the end, many of the people were slaughtered at the Missouri River, but Black Hawk and his entourage survived. But many even thousands of people died in that so-called war. And so the piece is filled with a lot of icons and symbolism. I think first the date there, 1492. Native people, they don't necessarily always see that date as a positive thing. And then you see that Fort Harmon date, the 1789, and then 1776 is definitely the U.S. Ratification of becoming a country. 1907, Indian Territory became Oklahoma, and there's some information there about that and this group of people, the Sauk and Fox, when they came from Kansas to Oklahoma. After being run out of the Illinois area and the Missouri River, were given a small patch of land, in northern Iowa, and wasn't all that nice. And then eventually they were moved over to Kansas, and then part of the group went back to Iowa, and then part of the group, because Kansas really didn't care to have any native people in their new state, were trying to forcibly remove native people from their state. And so this group of people who stayed, the Sauk and Fox who stayed in Kansas, heard about Indian Territory. And so in 1869, created a treaty with the U.S. government, and were given some land in Indian Territory. And that actually happened in 1867. And then in 1869, they actually made the physical move down to Oklahoma, and they were given land from the Creeks. The Creeks participated in the Civil War on the south side, and so because of their because of what they did, can't talk right now. But what they did, they took land from the Creeks, and they gave that to or they didn't give it, but they sold it to the Sauk and Fox. Mm-hmm. And so that long strip of land that the Sauk and Fox had in Oklahoma was actually Creek land. But the idea behind it, there's a lot of different symbols and some icons there. You see the concentric circles, and so those represent life. So the outer circle represents the physical. The circle around the inner circle there, it represents the mind, the soul. And then the inside the circle is the red. It represents the spirit of the individual. Mm-hmm. And then they're laid on top of each other, representing time, the different generations, that have passed before us. And then even the outline of the piece represents more of an idea of kind of how we see ourselves as Native people. Not everybody we see ourselves the same. I think there's a very strong, and I would call it a romance with our identity as Native people. There was strong belief, and we want to retain our culture, but even looking back at that time, it was very hard to make a living or to live on the land, and so modern American Indian. I think we're very, very spoiled, and we're very accustomed to the new trends of technology. But as the Sauk and Fox moved into Oklahoma at that time, they were also introduced to live very closely to other tribes, and from that, and really Oklahoma is kind of a melting pot of Native peoples. We talk about America being the melting pot of the world. Oklahoma is definitely a melting pot of Native tribes. Right now, there's 39 state and federal recognized tribes in Oklahoma, and at that time, the Sauk and Fox were very close to the Creeks, and also just north of the Seminole reservations, and so my ancestors became friends with Seminoles, and so my grandmother, who's full-blood Sauk and Fox, she ended up marrying a Seminole man, and so we have Seminole blood as well as the Sauk and Fox blood, and then my mother, who was Sauk and Fox and Seminole, ended up marrying my father, who was Creek and Seminole, And so I'm Sac and Fox, Seminole and Creek, but I'm enrolled in the Sac and Fox tribe. And so that's what the different little motifs there is a woodland motif that runs along the left side there that's painted blue and purple, and then you have a light blue designs going horizontally across the top, and those represent the Seminole patchwork designs that are readily used in the clothing. And so they kind of represent how the two different tribes use their designs, and so one vertical and one horizontal.
Right.
And the stars represent the different states that the native people came from, and actually there's quite a few stars and on the piece, and even on the sides there's a dimension to the sides. But they represent the states that the tribes came from, and they came to Indian Territory. And they were looking for a place where native people could be and could live in peace.
Right.
And so then if you look closely, there is a stripe that runs through the piece, both vertically and horizontally, and it represents the Creator, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and that really by His will we're still here, and so we still have a part to play in the history of the world, and we still have I think we still have things to contribute to the world, and so this piece definitely speaks about that. At the bottom there's a bag there, it's a tobacco bag, and so you see 2011, and that's when I finished the piece. But it really kind of represents man in the or native people in the 21st century.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different layers of application of acrylic paint. And so there's a lot of layers of just loose painting applications of acrylic paint being applied very transparent, like in very liquid form, and then I will create. I would take different types of plastic and cloth and pour the paint on to create that. Those rectilinear shapes, and very organic looking also, where the paint really infuses together and creates a background. And then I just begin to paint just freehand and with a brush and create the rest of the painting. And so lots of levels of depth in the piece. But a lot of interesting areas. I think that takes the design, the composition, takes the viewer around the piece pretty well, and some fairly decent content. I think I'm really pleased with that. And there's a series, I think, being developed in this style. I have another piece similar to it called 21st Century Man, and then I have a piece in the studio that I'm currently working on. But very pleased with this piece.
Like to tell us a little bit about this one?
Yes, this is a piece called William's Descendants, and I think just shortly after leaving, or in the graduate program at OU, I really began to incorporate photographs into the piece because it dealt with really my own identity as an individual and as an artist, and so I had seen the photographs of this individual, this man who's in the kind of the stair stepping downward as I began to learn more about this individual. He is one of the gentlemen who came from Kansas to Indian Territory in the 1860s, and so his name was his American name was William Tahlequah. And so he was a great grandfather on the Sac and Fox side, and so the photograph is a Smithsonian photograph from 1912, and so he's my paternal grandfather, and maternal grandfather are in a photograph together, sitting side by side, and they went to Washington D.C. on behalf of the tribe to talk about land issues. And so I had that wonderful photograph of a relative from that time period. Not many do.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
But I have both the maternal and paternal grandparents grandfathers. And so very, very valued image that I have in my collection. And so the piece is titled William's Descendants. And so as I learn more about this individual and just talking to relatives, talking to tribal members, doing some research, it was like I was beginning to know him better and begin to know more about him. And then also he gave some land to my grandmother. And so I grew up on that property. There was a live creek running through the property, and there was a train trestle in the back of the property and the train track. And so trains would run by, and so we spent a lot of times running around, fishing in the creek and swimming, and then later on I began to hunt the property with a fellow cousin, and so we really appreciated their efforts to hang on to the land. And it's still in the family's possession to this day, and so we really benefited from this gentleman's efforts to to remain intact and not sell his property, and so we really had a wonderful experience there on his land. And so the little triangle images are people are his descendants, and so there's one image with children towards the center, and so it's an Easter Sunday. And so his great grandchildren
That's pretty cool.
are on his property and enjoying that space, almost 100 years later, and actually 100 years later and then some, and so just wonderful opportunity to spend time with your relatives on his property, and then the gentleman who's just to the right of that and in the yellow triangle is my uncle, who was a paratrooper, and so he the Vietnam War, he was I don't think he ever saw a battle, but he was definitely right there, and he was preparing to go over, and he may have seen a little bit of battle, but his name was Jim Wood, and so just he carrying on that idea of being a warrior, because they were definitely a warrior society. And so I think that was a very nice image to include into the piece, talking about his descendants. And then to the far right is myself and my son. And he's probably about a day or two old in that photograph. And so I look pretty rugged in the photograph because I was working graveyard at that time. And I just got up from sleeping all morning, and my wife was dyeing Easter eggs, and our baby was just a few days old. Images of people that he would have known in his community. And so you see a couple there next to, and in the full photograph, I cut away part of it, but the family standing next to a bark house. And so there were still some people living in those types of structures in Indian Territory. And then to the far right was the agency school that eventually some of his children went to, and grandchildren went to, and so very narrative, I guess, in the content of the piece, and so then you see some imagery in the back. You see some of the motif there, the woodland motif, and then so you see the stripe there representing God. And that it's by His hand that we are still here, and by His grace that we still live and can contribute. And then again, you see the concentric circles that represent life. And so I want to include those because it talks about the generations before us, that lived and died. And then so we still have a responsibility, as individual Native people, to continue and contribute to society, and carry on our traditions and carry on our beliefs. And so. The piece, William's Descendants, is a very strong piece.
Now this is a piece in progress, I understand. But
yeah, this is a new form that I'm working in, and so not working in the just strictly two-dimensional rectangular shapes, but taking these triangular shapes, and then not only that, but also working in multiple planes. For the center there, where the concentric circles are, that's recessed. And then again, there's another piece that is raised even further above the overall triangular shape, and so it's raised off the surface quite a bit. And so I have a background in building homes and building things, and spent some time working in remodeling and construction. And I really appreciate that time because it really allowed me to, to learn and to use some tools and to build things, and I like doing that, and I think that's one reason why I like to I'm creative, and I like to be creative is because I get to use my hands.
Right.
And the artist, in the arts, you can be ever changing, or you can stay and create the same thing if you want. So I like the latter. I like to change. I'm constantly looking at new concepts. And so this is definitely one of the latest concepts. Very interesting shape. Every time someone sees the piece, they kind of gravitate toward it and ask questions about it. So I definitely need to get this one finished. And I have a couple other pieces very similar to this in shape. So these are some of the newer pieces that I'll be working on and getting these out probably in 2013.
You got something there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's look at the big piece then. And yeah, I love the richness of the Williams descendants too. I mean, it looks like it's done on cloth. It's so rich looking.
Oh yeah.
That was about restraint, because there's really not a whole lot of paint on it.
Wow.
It's really transparent in a lot of its quality, and not a lot of paint. So this piece is entitled "Life," and so the main thing I think that sticks out to everybody is the three stripes, again representing God, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and very dark, and I think a lot of times that's really kind of how life is perceived. Is that life, especially as you get older, maybe not as a child. I think when you're young, life is very carefree. You don't have responsibilities for family or job or income or anything like that. And so when you're a child, I think you're very much more carefree. But you're not eliminated from pain and suffering. And but as you get older and older, I think just your realization of what life can be and what it basically can become is pretty dark. And so again, you see the concentric circles in the back, completing the piece both from top to bottom, filling in that space represents mankind, and not always seeing each other clearly. I think it deals with more of just man as a whole, and not necessarily native man, but just mankind as a whole. And so you see some differences in different colors and shapes, and they're not all the same. Kind of maybe the idea of different cultures, and then not fully understanding each other. You're not seeing each other clearly as maybe God sees us. And so I think it's where we have a lot of trouble in our world, is that we don't understand each other, we don't respect each other, and so it makes life hard. And so we see that even today, with all the rumors of wars and all the different actions that different countries are taking against everybody. And so, but the thing is that I see about the piece that's most important, and even the title of it, is that how we can change. We can begin to understand and try to understand why we're here. And I think it's really what life is about. It's about God giving us an opportunity to experience life, but to get to know Him in a way that can change your life. I think a lot of times we really believe that we are here for us, but really I don't see that in the things that I read, and in the Bible especially. He says that he created us for Himself. And to have a relationship, to know Him, to know why He's created you. And in the way that He's created you also represents that idea, the idea of a triune being. And so we do have a physical, we do have a spiritual side, and then we also have the capacity to think and to learn. And then if you think about the creation itself, we have everything is pretty much in its perfect order. How we rotate around every 24 hours, and how every 30 days the moon rotates around us, and then how we every 365 days rotate around the sun, and at the perfect axis. And so if there was 1 degree change, just even a small amount, somebody's going to die on Earth. And so God has placed us in a very particular way, with very particular, in a very particular creation, and has given us seasons, and to really to understand who He is and how we are to live and respond to Him. And so the piece, you know, even though it's very dark, I think it has a lot to say about humanity and the possibilities of an idea that there is a creator that we cannot see. And so the little rectilinear shapes on the surface that are blue represents His Spirit going out to mankind and trying to touch them in a way that they would understand that I'm God and I'm in control, and I created you, and I've created you for a purpose. And so the piece is titled Life, and it's an acrylic painting stretched on canvas around a wooden stretcher. And yeah, so I think it's a very interesting piece, and yeah.
Well, I thank you for sharing that story, and thank you very much for taking time out to interview with us today.
Well, thank you very much for coming.